Hello, good afternoon. Okay, the afternoon session will start from our speaker from San Diego, United States. He, Mr. James, in fact, he specialized on the Korea Peninsula, but at these days, he thinks the model of the Vietnamese defense diplomacy is possible to be a part of the Korea countries for participate to the world. So let the James present his idea, and we will waiting for on the our comment as well from Kun Sek San. He came from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Thailand, and he also specialized on Korea countries, Korea issue. And let me inform that the article belonging to the Kun Sek San, published in 101 The World, is the most reader, influence, very high influence, rather than me. my article is not popular much, but Kun Sek San on Korea, quite interesting, and there are many leaders. Okay, James, please show your face and present your presentation.
All right. Thank you, Professor Ukrist. Thank you for the kind introduction. It is a pleasure to be here today. Once again, my name is James Banfill. I'm a visiting scholar at the Institute of Asian Studies at Chulalongkorn University. The title of my presentation today is Vietnamese Models in Defense Diplomacy and Peace on the Korean Peninsula. Today, I'll largely be focusing on the Korean Peninsula aspect of this paper. Currently, I'm in San Diego, United States, where I'm attending a meeting on the National Committee of North Korea, or NCNK. NCNK is a U.S. organization which supports and facilitates principled engagement between the United States and North Korea. So perhaps picking up on the idea of constructive engagement from the last presentation before lunch. Today I was in a whole day of closed-door meetings on North Korea. So should have a bit to talk about today. This image here is of the DMZ, or demilitarized zone, that divides the Korean Peninsula, taken from the east coast of South Korea. So in the foreground here is South Korea. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but in the background is North Korea, and then on the eastern coast of the Korean Peninsula. Let's see, next slide. This is perhaps a more familiar image of the DMZ at Panmunjom. I think most of you are familiar with that. And this is an image from Kaesong, the North Korean city beyond Panmunjom, inside the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or DPRK, commonly known as North Korea. As a bit of background about myself, as Professor Ukrist mentioned, I'm primarily a Korean Peninsula specialist with an emphasis on the DPRK. As a caveat to my talk today, I would say that my experience is largely in human security, humanitarian affairs, and cultural exchange, rather than hard security or defense issues. I also tend to work from a micro level and on-the-ground perspective, rather than the macro level and strategic perspective. So I'm a bit more familiar with issues like in this image, such as landscape, water, and agriculture. This is to say, again, I'm by no means a defense expert, although I have a bit of experience working on the civilian side of civilian military planning exercises related to humanitarian operations on the Korean Peninsula. So today I'll do my best to link up some of my past experiences working on the ground in North Korea to potentially what could be done with defense diplomacy on the Korean Peninsula, especially in reference to Vietnam and its own experiences. I would also add that my comments today are made in my academic capacity and don't reflect the organizations I work for. My presentation today has 4 parts. I will be speaking about the current situation on the Korean Peninsula, especially with regards to North Korea. I'll also speak to why defense diplomacy potentially has a role in the Korean Peninsula and why Vietnam is a good potential model for that defense diplomacy. I'll end briefly with a few recommendations on what I think can be done today concretely. So that's an outline for today. This image in the background was taken on Baekmyung Island, which is a heavily militarized South Korean island, only 13 kilometers off the coast of North Korea. So I visited here in, I think it was 2020, 2021. Briefly, what is the current situation on the Korean Peninsula? In addition to a long-standing conflict since the Korean War, the DPRK, or North Korea, has been closed to the movement of people since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. This here is an image of the Chinese-North Korean border at Dandong. And as a result of this long-term border closure, really today there are few active lines of communication with North Korea, with almost no on-the-ground international presence inside the country, with the exception of a couple embassies, such as China, Russia, also Vietnam, and Mongolia are continuing operations throughout the pandemic. But in general, there are very few people left in the international community inside North Korea today. As a result, there's a great lack of information on the current situation within the country with regards to the economy, with regards to politics, society, and of course, defense. So this essentially means that almost after 30 years of international engagement with North Korea, we're back to square one and waiting for the country to reopen. At the same time, we are seeing a real increase in tensions on the Korean Peninsula as the DPRK tests missile technology and pursues further nuclear capabilities. There is also discussion in the Republic of Korea about pursuing extended deterrence from the United States and even potentially its own nuclear program, which is highly controversial. This here is an image from a recent military parade in North Korea just last week. And then plus I've added some headlines here in the last week and the last month about South Korea potentially pursuing its own nuclear program. So we can say tensions are on the rise on the peninsula. And in this context, I would like to speak to 3 reasons why I think defense diplomacy may have a role on the peninsula in the future. The first reason is that defense-related issues are at the center of the conflict on the Korean Peninsula. I think for all of us, this is rather obvious. These issues include, but are not limited to, a future peace treaty to end the Korean War. This image here is the signing of the Armistice Agreement in 1953, and there has been no formal end to the Korean War. Other issues include nuclear issues, including North Korea's well-known nuclear program, and as I mentioned before, the possibility of South Korea pursuing a nuclear program. DPRK's missile programs and deployment of anti-ballistic missile technology in South Korea are also controversial. North Korea has a lot of issues with the ROK U.S. military exercises and the increases of South Korean defense funding. And there are other issues such as the potential for non-aggression treaty between DPRK and the United States and future force reduction. So this is just to say, suffice it to say, defense issues are at the center of the conflict. Clearly, solving any of these issues will require engagement with defense practitioners on both sides of DMZ at some point in the future. However, I'd say despite the centrality of defense issues, perhaps paradoxically, defense issues may not be the most accessible for addressing this conflict, especially as tensions are high. Both sides may not be willing to discuss defense issues without first rebuilding trust or taking part in confidence-building measures in other areas, such as traditional diplomacy or humanitarian operations. So, for instance, Sid Hecker writes in a recent book on North Korea's nuclear program. This came out this year. He writes, "I focus on the nuclear issue because its resolution is necessary, although I realize not sufficient to resolve decades of enmity on the Korean Peninsula." And I like this quote because it highlights the importance of defense-related issues yet also places them within the wider context of other issues such as trust building, traditional diplomacy, humanitarian engagement, and cultural exchange. For anyone interested in the nuclear program in North Korea, I definitely recommend this book. Again, it just came out in January. In this way, I think we really need to look at defense diplomacy as one potential tool among many. So, image of some tools here. It is certainly one that we need to cultivate in the long term to address peace on the Korean Peninsula. But we also, at the same time, need to recognize that its role may be limited in the short term and when carried out in isolation. So I don't think defense diplomacy is a panacea for solving issues on the Korean Peninsula, but it is certainly something we need to keep in mind and keep options open. A good friend of mine that works on DPRK issues as well says, when it comes to North Korea, we really don't have the luxury of throwing out any tools at our disposal, even if you don't agree with those tools. Like any conflict, there are political divides, and some would argue there's no place for defense diplomacy. I would counter that and say that, we need to leave it on the table and explore options into the future. The second reason why I think defense diplomacy is relevant to the Korean Peninsula is as a potential to better understand the Korean People's Army, or KPA, of the DPRK, which in turn is, I think, necessary to understand North Korean society and the country as a whole. And I mean this not so much in terms of understanding things like force structure or the strategic capabilities of KPA, but to try and build a better understanding of the KPA as an institution within North Korea. Korean People's Army is the second largest institution in North Korea following the ruling Workers' Party of Korea. It has an estimated strength of about 1.2 million personnel. So it's fourth largest military in the world by certain counts. And that includes around 1 in every 20 people in the North Korean population. So highly militarized society. In addition to defense, the KPA is also involved in construction, logistics, disaster relief, and most recently epidemic control. Most adult males in North Korea spend some time in the military, and that length may vary depending on their class and background. But so nevertheless, it's an institution which shapes people's further careers and thinking in their lives. Many families in North Korea have at least one member who's served in the KPA, and this even includes urban professionals or academics or scientists, people that, in other countries you might not expect them to have military ties, but in North Korea it is quite common. However, I would say that as an institution, our knowledge of the KPA, Korean People's Army, is relatively limited, especially in comparison to other militaries in the world. So I think important questions we need to look at is, what are the perspectives of KPA officers and soldiers, both formally and informally? What are their backgrounds in life and education? What are their interests and motivations? And what would be their interests in a future peace regime? Obviously, DPRK is invested heavily in defense. If one day we're talking peace and force reductions on the Korean Peninsula, what is the future role of the KPA? What is the future role of the personnel that are invested in the institution? Our limited knowledge of the KPA is partially due to secrecy on the part of North Korea, but it also has to do with our limited interaction of the military with foreigners in general. Granted, any interactions with DPRK, especially inside the country, are controlled and limited, but I would argue some interaction is better than none, especially since KPA represents such a large portion of North Korean society. It is much larger than those groups, such as diplomats, scientists, and urban professionals, or even farmers, agriculture practitioners, with which the foreign community generally engages. This is just an image of the top KPA generals visiting the mausoleum of Kim Il-sung recently. And so, to quote the Sid Hecker's book again, he's talking about the North Korean missile program, and he says, even less was known about the military leadership that commanded the strategic rocket forces. And this is in comparison to the relatively secret nuclear program. So there's much about the country's armed forces we do not know. From my very limited experience, and I'm speaking from a very small sample size, I have generally found military personnel in the country to be relatively straightforward to deal with and relatively direct. And this is actually speaking as an American citizen, which is kind of counterintuitive. I've found in my own experience that people in the military and military families tend to be more practical, less ideological than others, say those associated with the party. However, I would again caution that this is a small sample size, likely doesn't apply to the entire military. But again, this is just to highlight the point. We don't exactly know what are the motivations, what are the backgrounds in the military at different levels within the country. So this is to say, I think it's important that we have more opportunities to interact with KPA. Defense diplomacy with DPRK would potentially provide one way to gather those insights and to gather that experience and to cultivate those relationships. Thirdly, I think that defense diplomacy is valuable in that it brings a military perspective to many of the other issues, such as human security issues in the DPRK, many of which take place on a very large scale. These include, but are not limited to, deterioration of infrastructure, roads, water sanitation, energy infrastructure. It also includes chronic energy shortages, food insecurity, and environmental degradation. So this image on the left is just a composite satellite imagery of NDVI, which is an indicator of crop health over a season. It's just to show it's a large place and there's a lot going on there in terms of the landscape and where these problems occur. And on the right is an image derived from radar satellite imagery showing flooding in North Korea in 2020. And again, this is just to show this is a relatively small portion of the country where this flooding is occurring on this image, but it would be occurring on a larger scale than this image shows here. So these problems occur at a very large landscape scale. I think a military perspective is valuable in thinking about how to approach these problems, especially in the long term, whether it be logistically or from a human resource perspective. At the current time, most international humanitarian and developmental engagement with DPRK takes place on a very small, local or provincial level. Addressing these issues in the future is going to need taking a larger scale perspective. I think, again, a military perspective, both domestically inside North Korea and internationally, can assist in that analysis. Domestically, the KPA is one of the few institutions that has logistical and organizational capacity to work on a large scale. So their experience is certainly going to be valuable in the future, regardless of what tensions are and what the perspectives on the military side are. Here are a few images of the Korean People's Army involved in recent epidemic control. And I would say, again, additionally, the experience of militaries in the Asian region on issues such as disaster relief are very much applicable to North Korea, both currently and in the future. So to switch gears here a bit, in this context, I think it is worth learning from the Vietnamese experience in defense diplomacy over the last 40 years. There are a few reasons for this. The first is a number of similarities between Vietnam and the DPRK. Some of these are today rather topical because of the divergence of the two countries' economies and political systems over the last 40 years. But nevertheless, both countries share origins in Marxist-Leninist systems and control over the military by the party. Both countries have experienced fighting wars against powerful neighbors. This is an image taken from the War Museum in Ho Chi Minh City of foreign units deployed in Vietnam during the American War or Vietnam War, and includes not only the United States, but other countries such as Republic of Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and Thailand. So this is to say, of course, both countries have been surrounded or involved in conflicts with many of their neighbors. Vietnam has done a great job in repairing those relationships. North Korea has not. Both countries also share a strong emphasis on protecting national sovereignty, and I think this is especially a case where the Vietnamese example is especially relevant to North Korea. Simply, North Korea is concerned with its own national sovereignty, and we need to take that into consideration when dealing with the country on defense issues, diplomatic issues, humanitarian issues. Additionally, both countries share strategic locations in Asia between major powers. So there are kind of a lot of similarities, at least on the surface. Again, over the past 40 years, Vietnam has been very successful in reestablishing and rebuilding ties with its neighbors, including many former adversaries. And in this process, the military has played an important role. Military's role has been especially important, engaging the United States on war legacy issues. These include veterans affairs, remains recovery of both U.S. and Vietnamese soldiers in the war, removal of unexploded ordnance, or UXO, and remediation of chemical contamination from Agent Orange. In particular, remains recovery has been In particular, remains recovery has been a potential area of cooperation between the United States and DPRK, although the focus has been largely on American soldiers. Of course, much more work has been done in Vietnam with the United States. In recent years, Vietnam and the U.S. have worked together in expanding their capacity, not only for the recovery of American soldiers, but also Vietnamese soldiers lost during the war, especially using DNA analysis, modern techniques. I think a similar effort could be expanded to the DPRK, and this is to say going beyond solely the recovery of American soldiers from the war, but also the recovery of missing in action from North Korea itself. So South Korea currently does remains recovery of North Korean and Chinese soldiers lost in Korean War on South Korean territory. I think, again, this can be expanded potentially to North Korea, where there's more interest for the North Korean side rather than them just returning remains for American soldiers. Similarly, building capacity for the removal of UXO from the Korean War could serve as an area for cooperation. The ICRC has already done some work on this area inside DPRK, but more capacity is needed to address not only UXO from the Korean War, but also post-war landmines throughout the DPRK. And obviously, this is an area where Vietnam is still working with foreign partners, including the United States, Norway, and South Korea, and others, to remove UXO and landmines from the war. This image on the left is North Korean propaganda about American bombing during the war. And the image on the right, or at least my right, is a warning in South Korea about North Korean landmines that have been displaced by flooding events and potentially washed up on South Korean territory. So I think this issue of UXO and landmines is going to be one that stays with us into the future for a long time. Building capacity inside North Korea based on Vietnamese experience, it would improve lives in North Korea today, and it also has value for the future. Lastly, I think Vietnam can serve as an example of a military that has transitioned from almost full wartime mobilization, which is what North Korea is close to today, to maintaining a strong force within a peace regime, and the strong force that can defend its national sovereignty. So as I mentioned before, national sovereignty is an important issue for the DPRK. I think we need to recognize that and recognize the role of the Korean People's Army within that. So over the past 40 years, Vietnam has gone from having a military of 1.2 million or so, similar to North Korea today, down to 600,000. So relatively large by world standards. And I think that provides a good example of force reduction in North Korea in the future, in a scenario where we look at denuclearization or something like it. So again, this experience of force reduction without compromising national sovereignty would certainly be of interest in DPRK. I think any consideration of future peace regime in Northeast Asia is going to have to take this into account and the vested interests of the KPA, whatever those might be, either today or in the future. From time to time in South Korea, there's discussion about a future peace regime on the Korean Peninsula, where the Korean Peninsula is neutral in the world, or a nuclear-free zone. Again, I think Vietnam potentially serves as a model for a neutral DPRK or United Korea. For instance, Vietnam has a policy of the four no's: no partaking in military alliances, no siding with one country to act against another, no foreign military bases in Vietnamese territory, and no using force or threatening to use force in international relations. At the same time, the Vietnamese military engages in constructive international cooperation engagement with around the world, such as UN peacekeeping, to improve its international image, something post peace regime DPRK would certainly need to do, and to provide training for its military and improve interoperability with other militaries. So I think, in conclusion, Vietnam has a lot of relevant experience. It potentially serves as a bridge with the DPRK. It's a country that has a, again, long history of friendship with North Korea due to its socialist ties, and also has good relations with North Korea's adversaries, such as the United States, South Korea, and Japan. So as a conclusion, I'm going to provide a few recommendations of what can be done today, and we can talk more about this in the discussion. But the first is to say, I think that today, especially given the current context of the Korean Peninsula, really every form of engagement counts. All potential engagement with North Korea is valuable at this time, from my perspective. Many of the traditional forms of engagement with North Korea have stopped and need to be restarted. As I mentioned in the beginning, we're in a way back to square one. So I think there is definitely room for starting defense diplomacy on at least a small scale and keeping that going, trying to keep it sustainable, trying to keep it resilient. I also think that this means there's room for more non-traditional actors beyond the United States, Republic of Korea, China, and Russia. Nations such as Vietnam certainly can play a role, as can countries like Indonesia and Thailand, which have relations with the DPRK. Again, I think there's sometimes a reluctance for countries to take up this issue because it's traditionally seen as the space of the United States or South Korea. But as those two countries are sitting it out or unable to engage with North Korea, the room from other actors really can make a difference, I think, in this context. Militaries in the region could engage with DPRK on a number of thematic areas, such as remains recovery, UXO removal, disaster relief, public health and epidemic control, women, peace and security, and training for UN peacekeepers, as well as regional deconfliction. And to do this, I think we really need to have a greater culture of inclusion, to include DPRK on non-sensitive issues at regional military to military gatherings, and really making sure to build, to focus at these gatherings on actually building personal relationships with North Korean officers. As we know from other areas of engagement, things really have to start with person-to-person exchanges to build trust over time to make progress on issues in North Korea. Without those, I don't see much future potential for going beyond that. So it sounds very simple, very basic, but we need to start. And this may be even just striking up a conversation with North Korean officers when they're abroad. It's where things are, the situation of the Korean Peninsula is that tense. Relations are not developed enough where every little thing counts. And so I think in order to do this, I think we really need to educate ourselves, both civilian and military, on the realities of the DPRK as well as opportunities for defense diplomacy in the future, and lessons learned from past examples in the region. Again, as you can see, I really think Vietnam has there's a lot to learn from the Vietnamese experience. On the Korean Peninsula today, Much may seem opaque or out of our control with regards to North Korea. However, we certainly have control over how prepared we are to engage the country, whether it be in areas of defense, humanitarian aid, or diplomacy. So I will stop there for today. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm excited to hear what Kun Saxon has to say about this topic.
Okay, thank you, James. Please waiting for comment from Kun Saxon, please.
Thank you very much, Kap. Before I start, I'd like to express my appreciation to the organizer, the Institute of Asian Studies, especially Professor Ukrit Pathamanan and James Banfield, the presenter, who is a good friend of mine, and the organizers. The views expressed here are totally personal. They do not reflect those of the IC or Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I have 3 points here. I think the first point is about why. Why should we talk about the Korean Peninsula issue? I think this kind of issue is quite very difficult. We are talking about one of the most difficult security issues. It's always come with a security dilemma because a country's security can be another country's threat. So this is currently happening on the peninsula. So securitization is now increasing by our related parties, including the US, South Korea, North Korea, Japan, China. So all of them are now raising the process of this securitization. But I would say that we need to rethink about this issue as another serious issue of our region. This is one of the most 2 difficult flashpoints in the region, including the Korean Peninsula and the Taiwan Strait. So if any military conflicts takes place in Taiwan Strait or Korean Peninsula, that would affect, they will actually affect another one automatically. So this is why we should talk about this issue. But the concept today we discussed from this morning, defense diplomacy, I think is quite relevant for what we are talking. We need to rethink about the way of solving this issue from using diplomatic tools to increase or ensure security, rather than to use security tools to build kind of diplomatic channels. I think we should think in that way. So this is the key here. So I would propose the concept of re-securitization, because I think it's not that easy to talk about which is to eliminate securitization in the current process, but should by meaning is rethink about securitization in this region. Second point is that what to do. We start with why and we should go with what to do. I agree that Vietnam's model is relevant, and I think we out here maybe agree that Vietnam is relevant. But how can we persuade North Korea to adopt or follow Vietnamese model? This is another important question. And it's much more important because we see some relevance here that kind of like the remains of the things and like the weapons, everything. So Vietnam is very, very relevant, both regimes and also activities, actions. So I think the point here is that how can we persuade? And I totally agree with what James proposed. James also pointed out 3 key important points about the current situation, that there are no lines of communication, limited lines of communication, limited on the ground presence and information, and fragility of international engagement. So my answer here is kind of very, very easy, that then we should ensure these 3 issues. We should open lines of communication. We should increase on the ground presence and information, and also ensure fragility of international engagement. But what issues should be the key for engagement? So this is my third point. What issues should be the key here, and who should be the key players to engage North Korea? I think this is much more important and it's more practical issue. I would say that first, we should think about peace as both ends and means. We should see peace as a process. So it's not like single event, like in the Korean summit that the 2 leaders meet together and then they had a kind of agreement and then the problem will be solved. No, it's not that way. It should be process. So we should think about step-by-step engagement, not just one single event or one single package of engagement. I think the US tried this before and US failed during the agreed framework, because this can be another issue. But second point, the issue here, I would say that in order to re-securitize, North Korea could be more interesting in non-traditional issues, including climate change, including kind of agricultural development. Because I checked from the website of TICA, the Thailand International Cooperation Agency, North Korea, I think back in 2018, required assistance from Thailand about development assistance, focusing more on agricultural development, including some kind of rice production, including some kind of highland agricultural development. So this can be another issue. It can be soft issue that increase engagement with North Korea, and it can be win-win situation, and it can help increase human security. So I think this is what we should send a message, that security here is not only about military security, but it's also about human security. When North Korea has human security, then the regime would be stable or stabilized. I think that's the point. This should be the key message that we send to North Korea, that we should focus more on this. I still remember James and me went together to Mongolia. We discussed about kind of the role of Mongolia to engage North Korea, and we found that Mongolia is one of most interesting player to engage with North Korea, because recently the country adopted the Ulaanbaatar process, which is the name of the capital, Ulaanbaatar. This process is rather track 1.5 dialogue, and Mongolia is kind of well placed to engage every parties in the Northeast Asia. If ASEAN would not prefer to engage or to do this role, Mongolia can be one, because in Mongolia there are all embassies of the six-party talks. And also there are some kind of North Korean students, some kind of North Koreans working there. So I think Mongolia can be kind of one of the country that can play this role as a kind of constructive engagement. How about other players? I think this is very important. US always requires for the CVID, complete, verified, irreversible denuclearization. But as I just said before, CVID is not that easily possible. We should work as a process in order to achieve that CVID. So I think this is kind of a lot of work to do. I would say that China and Japan may not have a kind of bigger role here, but South Korea may have. But current government is a conservative government. President Yoon Suk-yeol, he aspires to achieve nuclear option. So this will be another difficult thing to do. So the key players in the six-party talks now, perhaps not a good key players to play on this issue. Then who will be good key players? Perhaps, Vietnam is one. How about ASEAN as a region? Because ASEAN, I think I would like to recall what Dr. Surin Pissuwan did in 2000. He invited the North Korean foreign minister to attend the ASEAN Regional Forum, because he thinks that isolation is not preferable for North Korea. Isolation will bring more tensions to the region and to the whole region, not just Northeast Asia, but also Southeast Asia. Because if we consider the fact that the current ICBM of North Korea can achieve everywhere in the world, then it will be kind of danger for everyone. So this is a big issue. So ASEAN can play a more important role. How about engage military officials through NADI, network of ASEAN defense institutes? Thailand has kind of very proactive in supporting this network, NADI. I think the SSC, Strategic Study Center, Sosoyo, is one of the organizations that has been active on this. Perhaps we can invite North Korea to be observer in these regional organizations in order to open the space for small engagement. Not that serious engagement, because some may be aware of the sanctions issues. So we will not touch the sanction issues that we have a hard engagement. But it can be kind of exchange, knowledge exchange, or kind of this meeting engagement, track 1.5. So this can be another issue that I think we can do. Then the role of non-state actors could be very relevant in ensure humanitarian assistance. Humanitarian, not human rights issue, humanitarian assistance. So I think this can be another one. So it should be kind of mixed strategy. I think when we talk about North Korea, we are thinking about the kind of the most impossible things in the world. So this can be another hard issue that we discussed today, apart from Myanmar issue. All right. So I will end up here, and I would hear more from you and from the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, คุณเสกสรร before we discuss in issue of the North Korea, I think we open for the new session on Myanmar because it may be good comparison or to understand the perception of the leader who they think differently as very different from open society, for example. Yes, I would like to invite the Kun Suparak to present on Myanmar.
Thank you. May I have remote control device for my slide? Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Suparak. I'm a journalist by background, so perhaps I'm only the person who has a pessimistic view in presenting these sessions on Thailand's role in Myanmar crisis. Okay, good, green one. If you get the schedule, perhaps I a bit change the topic and perspective. Previously, I tried to propose in the views of geopolitics, but I think our main theme is defense diplomacy. So I put into perspective of defense diplomacy. And my major argument for this is that defense diplomacy always lead to good relation between the two armed forces. And we assume that it could be good for peace and security and stability, whatever you name it. But my argument is that good relation between military not always good for peace and stability. This is the thing that I try to give you some sorry, I didn't go. Okay, oh, sorry. Okay. You see, I begin with brief history. Thai relations, armed force relation between Thailand and Tatmadaw as Myanmar military as widely known, not good until the end of Cold War. I think in the 1980s, when General Chachai Chunawans, who was then the Prime Minister, changed the policy. It means dramatic change of policy from a war zone into marketplace, that including Myanmar, not only Indochina side. In other words, Chachai connect directly to the authority in Yangon, that at that time is the capital of Myanmar, the name already then Burma, you know, on that. And the person who is the top the army commander is General Chawalit. Chawalit traveled to Myanmar and tried to make friends with the Tatmadaw, with the exchange of the dissidents in Thailand who fled from conflict in 1988. Remember that? This is bloodshed of protesting in Myanmar and other groups, including many friends of mine, also from that generation, here based in Thailand. And the two governments, military two governments also try to make friends, try to suppress the dissidents. That's the point. And since then, Thailand led support to the armed groups, ethnic armed groups along the border, that's dissidents, insurgency that operate for a long time for independence or some certain degree of autonomy. That's the key point. Military to military become a peak for my understanding, or they can build trust each other in areas when General Chawalit become the Prime Minister of Thailand, and he renews everything that he knows the Tatmadaw and make friends with a person like Somong. He's a dictator, shall we call brother. So they are brother in arms that way. Until late 90s, when Thai politics developed into what we call open, liberal, and democracy, as we like to name it. We have elected civilian governments under Chulalongkorn, Banhan, and later Thaksin. And our policy has changed toward Myanmar has changed we no longer, I can say we no longer have a kind of buffer zone that using the minorities or the ethnic minorities along the border as a buffer against the Tatmadaw. So trust between the armed force, Tatmadaw and Thai armed force, could be, say, as a peak point during dynasty time. And we allow the civilian government to drive the foreign policy, security policy, and the military sitting in the back seats and try to operate on the technical basis on their own. And we had some conflict with the Tatmadaw, some kind like misunderstanding that we can say, but military to military can contact among the others. We have cut in short into our time today. You will see that the situation lies back into the beginning against square one when we have another coup in Myanmar 2 years ago, and we're now having a more like strengthened the ethnic armed groups and the dissident. This time Burma, we go under the People Defense Force, NUG or whatsoever you came in. We now have dissidents. It's not only the ethnic groups but also the Burma groups. The Tatmadaw now has the enemy, and that we seek cooperation. The Tatmadaw will seek cooperation from friends across the border to suppress the minority and dissidents. That's the point. So Min Aung Hlaing begin his defense diplomacy with build another trust with Thai armed force when he came to power in 2011, and he has a really emotional relationship with the Thai armed force. When he asked the late Private Counsel General Prem Tinasudhan and his adopted father, Prem actually is a godfather of Thai armed force, I can say that. And then when Prayut staged a coup in Thailand, Min Aung Hlaing in Thailand for a visit and press the coup. This is the most success model that Min Aung Hlaing want to follow. It's been Tatmadaw always look at Thai armed force in terms of controlling politics and playing politics. This is the model. He kept good in touch with the even General himself, and Prayut in return vowed to support the Tatmadaw to fix his own problems. And he said clearly in public that he doesn't want to see any anti-coup in Thailand. That's the point. They kept close relations. Thai authority kept close relations. Close eye to the dissidents active in Thailand. A number like social violence. Many people threatening Halat sometimes by Thai authorities. And Prayut government also refrained from expressing or denouncing any negative things about the Tatmadaw. The coup, we'll see that Thai representative in the UN, also in ASEAN, avoid making any strong voice against the Tatmadaw. That's also that make a good relation between the two government, two armed forces, also make not so good for the democracy. And actually, General Nipat has already showed that we have a mechanism that make our armed force, with the armed force and the Tatmadaw and Thai armed force be close, and we have a solid mechanism to work together in order to secure our border, in order to make the thing happen along the border for security purposes. We have a high-level committees. In 2013, we have regional border committees that head by the heads of the regional army regions. We have township committee. We have unit cooperation. When on town to town, we have also like the head of the military units on Thai side and on Myanmar side. We also have that, and the civil reform of military attaché. We have military attaché in Naypyidaw now. There's a mechanism that make two armed forces close, building trust, make good cooperation in that way. Thai's armed force also offers flexibilities to the Tatmadaw when they operate along the border. We saw that when the Russian made MiG-29 flew over to Thai airspace, they offer a very good treatment from the Thai armed force. Our Prime Minister, our Air Chief, just saying that, well, there's no big deal. It's just like make a too far flyover and make a U-turn for that. But we all know that the operation, this is for the airstrike, is to suppress the dissidents along the border, particularly the KNU. The KNUs always, as far as the Thai armed forces know it very well, the KNUs is near to Mesa, and they're mostly connect to Thai rather than in Myanmar side. So, Thai armed force flew the F-16, but 15 minutes later it's a useless operation, just to pretend that we protect our airspace. But anyway, it's not the first time that happened. Our national security chief has said that it's happened 4 or 5 times last year alone. So this is not an accident. Perhaps this is a flexible and leniency that Thai armed force offer to the Tatmadaw for their operation to suppress the dissidents. This is a good relation. And sorry, I'll be back again. You see that picture during the airstrike operation, the MiG-29 across to Thai airspace. There are meetings of the RBC in Naypyidaw, and our army commander, 3rd Army Region commanders and they run onto the front page of the Global New Light of Myanmar, meaning that the Tatmadaw know very well how to play politics and how to use this for diplomacy operations. That I think perhaps they are better than Thai armed force counterpart. Again, you will have the 8 high-level committee meetings, I would say only 9 days after Thai police discover assets belong to Jen Min Aung Hlai, adult children. We have Thai Black Book accounts, SCB I would say, belong to Tin Kiri Tetmon, the daughter of Min Aung Hlai, and condominiums in Ratchadapisek belong to the Pearson, son of Min Aung Hlai, and the assets linked to the armed dealer. We know that name, Tun Min Lat. Tun Min Lat is a crony of Min Aung Hlai. He deals a weapon for Min Aung Hlai, for the Tatmadaw, and he has a deep connection to Thai elite senators. As a Thai American, the son-in-law of our senator, has been in business with Min Aung Hlai crony for decades, I would say. And that the meeting happened only 9 days after Thai police just discovered that asset. And 3 of them, Min Aung Hlai and his daughter, his son, were sanctioned by the U.S. I would say that maybe some implication, you like or don't like the sanction, is we have some implication to Thai business, to Thai interests as well. But the Tatmadaw, probably we don't know what when they meet 4-eye or sometimes person to person on the sideline of the high-level meeting in Rakhine State. Look, they use Rakhine State as a meeting place. You know what happened in Rakhine State? This is some like a signal in terms of diplomatic. We have seen that it's a strong message to say that our cooperation between the 2 armed forces has the same enemies, meaning the dissidents. Regular meeting of the normal mechanism sometimes is good for the corporations, but border securities and the thing that always good if you define it as the common enemy between the 2 armed forces. But this day, border security is not belong to only the armed force, but also belong to the dissidents, belong to refugees, connect to everything. So the operations along the border by the Tatmadaw caused the influx of refugees to Thailand. Now, Thailand sometimes opens the border for shelter, temporary shelter, but really temporarily, only a few days. Even sometimes there's a smoke still fly over in that territory. We push back the refugees to Myanmar side. They will face dangers, or perhaps it could be a danger for their life and living. We officially have perhaps 90,000 of refugees since 1988 along the border with Myanmar. Since the coup in 2021, we have no official record of the refugees who fled from the conflict, the new conflict. But the UN and the partner of the UN registered some 5,000 people also go on and off along the border. That's another security threat for Thailand as well. But the Tatmadaw and Thai armed force maybe see the same thing. They try to push them back or get rid of them, but that might be another story. Defense diplomacy, perhaps I would try to paraphrase this as a defending Tatmadaw instead of defending national security. Thailand also played this role in defending Tatmadaw in many occasions. First, after the coup, and 2 weeks after the coup, Thai government invite Wan Aung Hlawin in Bangkok in the pretext to see Masudi in Bangkok, but the Tatmadaw utilized the visit another way. The New Light of Myanmar again highlight that Wan Aung Hlawin, their Minister of Foreign Affairs, Union Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister of Foreign Affairs was invited by Thai Minister to be in Thailand. Diplomatic way we can interpret it like the recognition for Min Aung Hlaing, for the regimes in Myanmar. That's the first time they did. Second time, just recently in December, our Foreign Minister Don invites Wan Aung Hlawin again to Bangkok for a non-ASEAN talk in Bangkok to find some solution, alternative solution. I have an article in Thai just criticize that it's not the quiet diplomacy. It's some kind like around diplomacy with a wrong way, because Thailand invite only Wan Aung Hlawin, the military regime, rather than the opposite side, the dissidents, or also the armed groups. Why don't they are invited? And Wan Aung Hlawin also, he is a career diplomat. He knows how to play along that. He also brought with him Minister of the International Corporations, Minister of Investment to Thailand for a bilateral negotiation for their business interests also. And Thailand also invite the foreign minister from Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, just pretend to be that it's a like-minded minister sitting together to talk about Myanmar issue. Why the others ASEAN member, particularly Singapore and Indonesia, disagree with that meetings in Bangkok. So the foreign ministers of Singapore even wrote letters to Don saying that anything connected to the ASEAN should not include the representative, political level representative of the military regime, but it just happened outside. They say that it's non-ASEAN, but all attendants are ASEAN members. So I think it's like a tricky diplomatic. This is my recommendation, a suggestion, or my way for having a new rule, setting for a new rule. If Thailand want to change the rule, and if Thailand want to have like a real role for fixing this problem in Myanmar, we should do as following. First, elect a new government rather than a pro-military government. You cannot change General Prayut's attitude toward Myanmar because he is the same background with Min Aung Hlaing. So you cannot change his attitude. when he see Min Aung Hlaing, he say himself, he's a shadow, he's General Prayut. So we need a new government. So the new government should embed democracy and human rights in foreign policy. I think I can argue that Thailand has played a very crucial role in the past. Dr. Sulin, as you mentioned, one of them who has a very clear mind about democracy and human rights and how to engage with the Tatmadaw. He didn't please that Madaw. He engaged with a very clear mind how to work with Tatmadaw. That's the point I would like to raise on. So the next government want to do the same as Dr. Sulin has done in the past, to engage with the Tatmadaw, but in different way, but in different manner. But in some kind you have to negotiate, or sometimes you have to put pressure, a bit more pressure, or sometimes you have to relax a little, step back to have flexibility for it. Stop supporting Tatmadaw operations along the border. I think if you have like Ambassador Sihasak says, when military to military talk, they talk the same language. So if you are friends, just talk with the Tatmadaw, talk with Min Aung Hlaing. So please stop bomb our border, because you are people friends to our border, and that's the problems. Just say as friend to friend. If you are really friend, you have to talk as a friend. So Thai new government and the defense diplomacy had to engage with Tatmadaw in the same way. We should have our stand clearly. Although we have the same coup, but our coup is different. We don't kill our people, but you kill your people. So stop killing your people. That's the point we have to raise with Min Aung Hlaing. Provide the safe zone. I talk many forums and propose many times that Thailand should open our border as a safe zone for dissidents. We have for a long time, and we don't have problem with having that people along our border. We have still now 90 million, or sometimes we have 100 million, 100,000, sorry, along the border. We absorb a few millions of migrant workers in Thailand, meaning Thai economy can absorb that a large number of other people. So why not only 90,000 people along the border? Perhaps more than half of them born there along the border. So provide a safe zone for them. Treat them like a human being, not a refugee. And play an active role helping to end crisis in Myanmar. Finally, defense diplomacy, if need, should aim to convince Tatmadaw to have peace and reconciliation. If you invite Min Aung Hlaing, you should to invite Aung San Suu Kyi. You should invite President Win Myint. You should invite Dr. Saza or whoever that have a different idea for politics in Myanmar to be in Bangkok and sit and talk hands-friendly as their national. And Thailand could facilitate this. We have experience and we do this for many times. Thank you for your cooperation. This is Myanmar helicopter that operate the airstrike. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Supalak. So, will be comment by Wong Wan.
Hi, hello, good afternoon, or thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Supalak. It's very clear-cut, and I have very few comments actually. But actually, I have some points that I would like you to discuss and clarify more about your argument. I have 2 points to mention. Firstly, in your presentation, you said that the Thai army and the Tatmadaw have very good personal ties between each other. But actually, when asking some other experts, like for example, David Mathisen, he argued that actually the Thai military and the Tatmadaw, they don't love each other that much, but actually they hate each other and they don't trust each other. So I would like to discuss with you. Do you agree with this statement? And more than that, David Mathisen also argued that despite the fact that they hate each other, they just need to cooperate just because they have some mutual interest. Yes, so I would like to discuss with you about this. And the second and the last point that I would like to reflect is about your conclusion to the new roles that Thailand should have on the Myanmar situation. According to your conclusion, it seems like you place a hope on the new government, and the new government, by your definition, must be the civilian government. And so it seems, if I not misunderstand, it seems like that there is no hope that Thailand can perform constructive role if we are still under hybrid regime or still under the military rule administration. But in reality, I would like you to discuss about like what if the Prayut administration can prolong their power. Could you have any recommendation about the role that Thailand should take in these different realities? That's all from me. Thank you.
Okay. Before response from Suparak, shall we open the question? Respond. Are you happy to know the sad story in the giraffe as a pet in Myanmar? And how about the comparison about the military perception of the Vietnam leaders? Can compare for two countries? No? Yes.
Thank you. Just a comment on the border issues. Right now, because we are more integrated in ASEAN, right? So we would like to think that the border of ASEAN nations is not in the term of state-on-state sovereignty things. You know, when we are talking about a new normal, we need a new normal of border management where it's not a military-to-military conflicts. If you violate, Thailand border, it would be law enforcement issues because we are not competing for territories, like that anymore. So my point is that the border would be softer. Not so aggressive border where we need, military guard with weapons, and if you just step over the line, I'm going to shoot you, and things like that. So in this aspect, then the border would not become military issues. It would become law enforcement, concerning, like say, drug trafficking, even, crossing the border without passport, without valid visas and things like that. It would not become security in terms of our military security. It would be more about interior ministry, things like that, or border police issues. Like in the South China Sea, why the Chinese using Coast Guard and naval militia? Because they don't want to military conflicts with the U.S. Navy. So this is more of a softer approach. It's more of it's a 1.5 hard power, things like that. So my point is that I think we need to think more how we manage ASEAN borders in a peaceful way.
Okay. There are any response or question?
Okay, thank you for a good comment from Kun Wongpan and very, very good point. I totally agree. Sometimes we just say they have emotional relation, but not exactly mean that way. Thai military and the Tatmadaw, person to person, they pretend to love each other for their own mutual benefit, not because they love each other exactly. Why? General Prayut have to defend Tatmadaw for his own sake. for his own recognition in international forums. He did not attend the special summit in Jakarta in April 2021 just because he cannot listen to the criticism over the military regime from ASEAN colleagues. Because you criticize Min Aung Hlaing, you denounce the coup, also you denounce the coup in Thailand as well. So from our distance, I think General Prayut have to defend their regime for the sake of his own. And if he succeeds, actually he succeeds because he has already been in power for 8 years, Min Aung Hlaing will follow his step. And it would be a model for ASEAN. Any country that loves using force to take for political power, you will follow this way. You just take over, you stay for a while, you draft a new constitution, you design the electoral system to benefit for your own. And at the end, General Prayut can continue his power. So if this case happens, your second question is it's very hard for me to answer as well because I don't know if General Prayut continue his power and anybody in Thailand can tell him, so please talk to your younger colleague, so please stop killing his own people because they will cross the border to us. These are our problems. Who can say that? I don't know. Or if that's possible, I may say yes if General Prayut is similar to General Prem. At least he knows how to exercise power. At least he knows how to allow the foreign ministry. I know in foreign ministry they have a different policy actually. They want to play a significant role for providing humanitarian assistance to Myanmar people. They want to deliver everything necessary for the people in need. But as far as I know, people at the government house, at the NSC, just say no for that effort, or at least not to facilitate well enough for the deliveries of that assistance. So for your point, General Jodwood, I really totally agree if we change our model into law enforcement, but we have to make sure that who can operate that policies, which government will operate that policy when you have the armed force sitting in the center of the power. I think, foreign people know that who will suppress the narcotics trafficking should be police, right? Who will suppress the human trafficking should be police, right? Because we can follow things we bring to the court also. But military operates along the border, and the law enforcement sitting somewhere very far away from us. Thank you.
Let me share. This afternoon suggests me a very, very important issue I would like to share to you. When you mentioned the General Prayut can speak with the younger friend, Min Aung Hlaing, it reminds me, Kun Suthithayun mentioned the article from the Diplomat, and I read as well. President Joko Widodo suggests in interviewing the General of Indonesia quite understand that about militarization in Indonesia and now reform, and can suggest as to be advisor for Min Aung Hlaing and their friend. It means that very important mentality of the military leader can share together, and we should learn from outside, from the civilian approach. Why not? Because I remember the oldest, the biggest knowledge of the global issue, the history derived from military cadet, archive research, and there are some similarity. Why they think similarity? What they think about the authoritarianism? What is national interest of them? Very interesting. I suggest to study that mentality while they talk together. It's another side of the perception of the military role. I always heard that about it. The Thai general mentioned we have already the window to discuss of the neighboring country, why the window not function for peace talk together. Let me give a good example when I will present my presentation. I back to research article, research book belonging to General Prayut from National Defense College. What the title? Can you guess? Non-traditional security. He know a lot. 5 chapters and everything. Migrant worker, drug, everything. But I didn't know anything since he take the coup until now, more than 8 years. It seems that he know, but he believed or not on that specific issue. Your response give me a good example. Maybe Southeast Asia democracy should learn how Indonesia military reform a little bit success. First, Ministry of Defense Minister civilian. Very important. Taiwan are very authoritative. Woman is a defense minister. Very important. I remember when I visited to the conference about the military and democracy in Asia in Heidelberg. This is a very important issue. First, your top leader should be civilian. We recognize a very productive, efficiency, a good command, many things on any crisis of the world belonging to military officers. We agree, but how? How transform the efficiency system and mentality to transform open society? I think it is, we should learn. We are talking about existing events in Southeast Asia, but repeat. We are repeat. Coup. In Thailand, I call twin coup. 2006, 2015, quite the same. The same coup makers and the same mentality. Why? We should back to what they learn, what they lead. My friend, Filipino professor mentioned, Ajahn, could you please to read what curriculum which General Chawalit learned? Please. I think this is a very important thing to understand them. We are not enemies. We are friends. But friends have to talk speakly, directly, openly, and friendly. Thank you very much. So we move to related issue about it. Thailand admit the U.S. and China confrontation and what the Thailand role. Please, Dr. Am Tang Nirankun. He is professor from law faculty, and also he is the director of the Chinese Studies Center, Chulalongkorn University. Our project, I emphasize, cannot ignore China factor. So we should invite Dr. Arm, who can speak Chinese, understand China very well, to produce his own idea about what role of Thailand to say what in the confrontation between the two superpower. Okay? ครับจันดูบนกันนะเดี๋ยวผมจะอยู่ตัวของพี่เขากล้องเขาจะส่องแล้วอาจารย์จะกดอันนี้เพื่อได้ครับ
ปกติมันต้องกดยังไงครับ
ส่องตรงนี้ครับ
ส่อง
ผมจะเปลี่ยนครับได้ครับ
Thank you very much, Professor Ukit, for your very kind introduction and for your invitation to share some of my views with all the distinguished panelists and participants. Basically, what I'm going to talk about is provide some observations about the U.S. and China geopolitical tension, and then to offer some of the views on how Thailand should adapt to this new environment. I often think that the situation between the U.S. and China, or the current geopolitical tension in the world, is very similar to a period in Chinese history, which is called the period of the Romance of the Three Kingdoms. A lot of the Thai audience will know because it's a very popular historical period in Thailand and also in China. And it's a very famous novel also. Now, what's the similarity between the two periods? My point is that if we think about that period of the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, we see the end of the dominance of the Han dynasty and the beginning of three powers balancing one another. And it's very similar to what's going on in today's world. We see the end of American dominance, and we see the start of the three powers balancing one another. Now there's a question, right, of what are these three powers. But I think we have to accept as a fact that from 1970, when the size of the U.S. economy is double the size of the second largest economy, to the reality today, where the first largest economy in the world, the U.S., and China, the second largest economy in the world, becomes a lot equal in terms of their economic size. In reality, according to power purchasing parity, China's GDP already exceeds the U.S. But in terms of dollar terms, I think the projection is that within 10 years, China is likely to surpass the U.S. To be the world's largest economy. Now, I think that in China, with this analogy of the three kingdoms, there are two different interpretations. One as seeing the three kingdoms as the three powers as the US, Europe, and China. And then another one is seeing the Western power, China and Russia. So I will explain these two analogies and then how it relates to the situation today. Now, with the first analogy, I think we see China as Liu Bei or in Thai, Lao Pi, for the Thai audience. And China is still the smallest of the three powers. If we compare the China size of economy to the US, to Europe, China is the emerging power, is the rising power. And similarly to the kingdom of Liu Bei in the Han Dynasty, the strategy of Liu Bei at the time is to focus on the orange piece of land, which is called Sichuan. And before Liu Bei met with Zhuge Liang, who is the chief great strategist in that era, all the warlords during that period only compete in the yellow area, which is called Zhongyuan. Right? But Zhuge Liang actually transformed Liu Bei's strategy by saying to him that you need to focus on the untapped space, which is the orange area, dominate that area, and then stabilize the situation, become one of the three powers. And how is that similar to China today? China sees the Belt and Road Initiative as focusing on untapped space from Central Asia to Southeast Asia to the Middle East to Latin America to Africa. It's their strategy of looking at the emerging economies where in the past a lot of Western powers neglect all these economies. And then China sees it as a major strategy to focus on this untapped space and then to dominate this space and become one of the three great powers in the world. Now another type of analogy is to think as of the Cao Cao, right, the strongest faction, the yellow piece as the Western faction, the Western power, seeing the US and EU as one dominating power, and then to see China as the Sun Quan, as the green piece, and then to see Russia as Liu Bei, the yellow piece. And the logic of this is that China is very, very similar to Sun Quan during the Han Dynasty. It's an economic superpower, but it's not a military superpower. While Russia is the weakest among the three, it's not an economic superpower, but it's a military superpower. It's always on the proactive strike. It's always going to battles with Cao Cao. Now, there's a very interesting logic here, right? Because if you look back to the Han Dynasty, actually the alliance between Liu Bei and Sun Quan is actually a very weak alliance. If all of you can remember from the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, right? Every time that Liu Bei or Zhuge Liang strike to the north, Sun Quan actually just sit still and wait for the opportunities. And that's actually very similar to the situation with the China and Russia alliance today, right? Actually, it's not a strong alliance. It's actually a rather weak alliance. The two of them have to ally with one another to fight with the dominating power, but actually they are not really the close alliance. Another very important analogy here, similar to the Han Dynasty, is that China is not really interested in changing or supplanting the existing order, because China actually benefited a lot from the current order. So China has actually a strong interest in maintaining existing order while transitioning to replace the US at the top, but within the existing order. And that's actually similar to what's to the situation in the Han Dynasty. Because if you remember, right, Sun Quan doesn't really want to want to win over Cao Cao instantly, right? Sun Quan want to actually grow within Cao Cao's order, and then in the end replace Cao Cao. But Sun Quan is actually different from Liu Bei, which is actually try to win over Xiao Shao instantly from the start. So I discussed all these analogies and all these situations in my latest two books. One is Chimerica, which describe the trade war and tech war between the US and China. And the second book is China Endgame, which describe the relationship between China, Russia, and the US using this analogy. Now, there's many different domains of competition. To understand the US and China geopolitical tension, you have to understand that it's not a traditional Cold War in many different respects, right? One difference from the previous Cold War is that in the previous Cold War, Russia and the US is actually two very different systems. But as I mentioned, right, in today's world, the China and US actually compete in one system, in the capitalist free trade system, which China actually benefit enormously. So there's a key difference here, because in the previous Cold War, there's not many interconnectedness between the two economies. But in today's world, actually as we speak, the tension is rising. But actually the latest statistics on the US and China trade is actually breaking record, right? So there's a lot of interconnectedness between the two superpowers. And what that means is that they have to somehow live with one another. So the strategic aim of the US is very different from the strategic aim of the US during the Soviet era, during the previous Cold War era. Because the current strategic aim of the US is not actually to destroy China, right? But just to weaken China, but not weaken to an extent that will go back to affect the US. Now, one of the major domains between these two superpowers is the tech war. And my point here is actually that this is a very new frontier of competition, and that it will go on for a long time. And this has a huge implications to Thailand and many developing nations, right? We often ask the question, if technology will be decoupled, right? And if in the future there's two chains of technology, which chain do we have to choose, and will we be forced to choose to join one chain and then neglect another? Now, when we talk about the tech war, many people think about China's race to the latest chip technology, the latest semiconductor, right? But in China, actually, the strategy that they often talk about, one is that they have to dominate the domain that they already good in doing, and that's the 14 plus nanometers chip market, which there's a strong belief that China actually can produce a lot of these chips. China has problems in the advanced chips, but not actually in the lower tier chips. And then another strategy is also to accelerate their competition in the new frontier technology. And I think that they will use these two cards as a bargaining power with the US in this new tech war. Now, what does that mean for Thailand? Right? Because our topic here is Thailand amidst all this evolving situation. And I think that if you believe in the analogy and in the landscape that I described, you will understand that actually it's a misleading way to describe the situation today as the end of globalization. Because actually globalization is still going on. There's strong trade relationship between US and China, as I mentioned, with the trade statistics. So there's still globalization. There's still this huge chain. But actually there's also a fact that there's a need and there's a space for diversification. For every businesses, there's this question of mitigating risks, of diversifying risks, right? Of diversifying markets, not just put all your eggs in the Chinese market or even in the US market. So there are these two games complicating one another and going on at the same time. So it's not black and white, right? It's not either globalization or the end of globalization, and it's not actually recoupling or decoupling, right? It's this very complex, very fluid, very dynamic situation. So I think this is a picture that we have to understand. I often describe that there's multiple trade chains going on. Globalization is still going strong with US and China at the core. But there's also the US and the rest, right? With kicking China out from this chain, from the CPTPP, from the Indo-Pacific strategy. But there's also the Chinese chain, China and Asia, China and the rest, and try kicking the US out. And we see this in the Belt and Road Initiative, in the RCEP coordination. And then we see a lot of talks about the rest, forming an alliance with one another, forming a group, right, and kicking both China and the US out. Right? If there's a real risk of war happening in Taiwan, for example, then it's not just the Chinese market that's at risk, but also the US market, right? So we see the four chains, multiple chains going on at the same time. And for that, right, it has huge implications for Thailand. I often say that we have to move from reactive to proactive balancing strategy. We have to play both games. We have to understand that globalization is still a thing, but then there's also a space for diversification. We have to try to link with multiple chains, exploring multiple linkages. And we have to shift our focus in the past only from major markets into looking at the wider world, looking at the emerging regions of the world. And we have to understand this fragile and complex state of geopolitics. To end my presentation, I would like to offer 3 keywords, which I call 3M, as Thailand's strategies amidst this fluid, dynamic, and complex geopolitical tension. The first M is middle power. I think that we need to understand our role, not just as a small power without agency, without any proactive strategy, but to understand that in this new environment, both the China and US really needs us, right? And there's a big reflection for us to think about what's our standing points, what's our interest, what our negotiating powers to balance between the two powers. Second M is mainland Southeast Asia. Thailand's market is quite small, but we are situated in a very strategic location. So with our central location, right, we can be the springboard for both China and the US to explore the vast market of mainland Southeast Asia. And final point, the last M, is that we have to think about risk mitigation, actually in exploring multiple linkages between these 4 different existing chains that I previously mentioned. So I leave you with these 3 M's: middle power, mainland Southeast Asia, and risk mitigation. Thank you very much, and I look forward to our engaging discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have a commentator from a beautiful lady, Kun Natha Gomolwatin. You may know she's one key person who organized Thai PBS World. Okay, Kun Natha.
Sawadee-ka. Good afternoon, and I'm very honored to discuss Ajahn Am's presentations. I interview Ajahn Am many times, and every time I talk to him, it's really interesting the way he points out scenario or frontiers, especially between the two superpowers. It has been the main interview that I have discussed with him in the past few years, and we could see that tension has risen up between the two superpowers, and it's the topic that I touch upon in my program nearly every night. And audience asks, is it the only issue that you report or cover about the geopolitics? But since the Russia-Ukraine war has been apparent, has been obvious, and it's nearly 1 year anniversary, the issue of geopolitics between US and China even more obvious, and it's interrelated. So thank you for Dr. Am for showing us from historical fact to see the three kingdoms of US, China, EU, and also with Russia as well. And we couldn't deny that it's competing and become contested terrain for geopolitics. And it's, of course, obviously affecting Thailand as well. And Thailand cannot stay still. And from the encounter that I met with senior officials of the Western countries, and especially recently with Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, I think to myself that it has become the one question that I tend to ask everyone I met is, what's the position of Thailand regarding this tension between the two superpowers? And what will happen if we are forced to choose, or what should we do if we have to choose? And when I ask Western senior officials, they tend to say, oh, the US just would like to establish more friendly relations with countries in Southeast Asia. We will never force you to choose. But whenever you see the ministers coming to this region, they tend to emphasize the same thing, the same words that I can catch upon, like we need to respect international rule-based order, maintain freedom, free and open space in this region. And that's the thing that China oppose or have the position against this international rule-based order. And China tend to ask, what do you mean by international rule-based order? And the US emphasized on Indo-Pacific strategy. And it's the same thing with the UK and France. When you saw President Macron come to Thailand, he also emphasized that France is Indo-Pacific country. So I can see this power playing between Western alliances and China. We tend to mention the US and Western alliance. Please stop Cold War mentality in this region. So I could see tension coming up between the two camps, and the war between Russia and Ukraine doesn't help. It even makes the division deeper and deeper. And that's the geopolitics that we are facing right now. And it doesn't stop with Thailand, of course. And when I asked Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim about this, because it's the issue that all of ASEAN is facing as well, he said it is not fair for this region to have to choose between either the US or China, because we have to work with both. And with China, it's the big neighbor in this region and big trading partner in this region. So there's no point that we have to ignore China to work closer with the US. And with the US, it has been old friends in this region for a long, long time. It's very well established friend with the region. So it means we cannot choose. So the problem, not problem, but the question for me is, what is the clear policy or defense policy of Thailand at this very juncture? Because it turns out that the tension between two camps, the US and China, will not stop or will not be changed very easily. During President Trump, we thought that President Biden come, probably the atmosphere will be a bit softer but it turns out to be the other way around, even more aggressive between the US and China. And President Xi Jinping will be at the world stage for a long time, I think. So this issue won't go away easily. So the question probably, if Ajahn Am would like to extend further, what is the strength of Thailand to remain at this very juncture amidst the tension in the region? Should Thailand take side more or closer with ASEAN, because Thailand cannot stand alone, but ASEAN itself is not on the same page. Myanmar is also a crisis for the whole region as well. So how do you see position of Thailand at this very juncture? You mentioned Thailand is middle power and we have to work more in different style with different countries, but could you elaborate more on that? And with the US and China becoming main superpower, main rivals, but you said this won't lead to decoupling, but what's the scenario will be in the near future? Does it mean that the business partner people will have to have two smartphones? Because we probably cannot use iPhone all the time. We have to use Huawei. So that's the question that I would like to pose to this discussion. What's the positioning of Thailand in order to negotiate in this situation of the intense competition between the US and China? And should Thailand take closer or have grouping atmosphere to protect Thailand foreign policy? So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So let me ask my friend from Canberra, Australia, Ajahn Craig, can you hear me?
Hello.
Hello. Can you comment the presentation from the Dr. Am? You read his PowerPoint and listen. Yeah, and listen to some big question from Kun Natha Gomunwatin as well, right? Okay, start.
โอเคก่อนอื่นผมอยากบอกว่าขอบคุณมากอาจารย์อุกฤษที่จะให้ผมโอกาสนี้ที่จะพูดถึงเรื่องนี้กับท่านผู้ฟังทุกคน so thank you very much for this opportunity to talk with you all, and thank you very much to Ajahn Am for a really fascinating presentation. I really enjoyed the use of Samgok of the Three Kingdoms model for looking at relations between Europe, United States, China and Russia. I've just got 3 points really, and I'll make some comments about the implications for Thailand. Now, first of all, I'd just like to point out that models in which we simplify power to primarily material power, that is economic and military power, I think are never a complete picture or a complete way of explaining international politics. And I think we just need to be a bit careful because I do still believe that as well as the importance of a country's economy and a country's military, I think it's always important to think of a country's soft power. Or as I like to call it in more political science terms, its legitimacy. That is the extent to which its values are the values that are attractive to other people in the world. And I still think that this is an area where the United States has a strong lead. Now, we all know that the United States doesn't always practice what it preaches. It's often very hypocritical. It's very contradictory in its application of democracy as a principle in its foreign policy, but at the same time, I think it is a factor which makes the United States more able to assume a leadership role in the region, whereas I think while China has obviously made great strides in terms of its economic progress and its military as well, I think it lacks soft power, and I think it lacks legitimacy, because it is, after all, an authoritarian power ruled solely by the Chinese Communist Party, and the Chinese Communist Party is, when it comes down to it, simply trying to create the most favorable environment for its continued rule. We should never forget the Chinese Communist Party always frames party interests ahead of even national interests. The second point, I think that we do need to be a little bit aware of is that we are now in an era, and I think Ajahn Ahm's presentation really brought this out very well. It's not just geopolitics that we have to think about these days. It's what I would call geoeconomics. That is, economics is no longer a matter of liberal economics where all countries seek to allow the world market to determine their investment. This was an era that perhaps was never as pure as the United States and the Western world liked to make out that it was. I think they always maintained their economic dominance quite carefully in many industries, but at least there was verbal commitment to liberal economics, and those sorts of liberal economic institutions like the World Trade Organization and the IMF and so forth. But now we see a much more obvious commitment to using economic instruments as a lever of national power. And of course, as Ajahn Ahm has made very clear, high technology is where we're seeing that come to the fore. In terms of the US-China dynamics, I think it's really worth considering how we've got to the situation we are with the US and China. And I think there's a very interesting book that's been written by Professor Ho Gung Feng, I think his name is, on Clash of Empires. And this book tracks the way in which US business had a very positive view of China, particularly during the 1980s and 1990s, because of the investment opportunities it offered for them. But as time has gone on, US companies have felt less positive about China. That is because they are not often given market share. They often have to compete with Chinese companies, and those Chinese companies have often received US technology either through theft or by arrangements which force the US company to hand over their technology. And this has meant that US companies over time have felt that they have not done as well as they should have. And over time, they have joined this national security establishment in the US to become critical of China. And this is why we've got now, I guess, unanimity in the political class in the United States as regards China's threat. Now, just let me talk about the implications for Thailand. I think that Thailand has always historically, and this is part of the dominant narratives of Thai foreign policy, to balance between major powers. And of course, every Thai foreign minister will always acknowledge King Rama V, King Chulalongkorn, as one of the principal exponents of being able to manage relations with multiple great powers in order to ensure Thailand's independence during the colonial era. Now, I think this is something which continues as the bedrock of Thai foreign policy, and I think it is a foreign policy which is sustainable. But in a world of geoeconomics, it may come with some costs. For example, Thailand is a treaty ally of the United States, but I think the Thai-US relationship has had some serious difficulties since the 2006 coup and certainly since the 2014 coup. And I think that we see that while both parties continue to say that it's a strong alliance, there is evidence that it's not as strong as it was. And if you look at, say, Exercise Cobra Gold, the size of Exercise Cobra Gold, and I've been looking at the numbers, has diminished considerably from the 1990s. I think if it hadn't been a multilateral exercise, the US might have in fact cancelled it after the 2014 coup. So I think this would be difficult for Thailand and particularly for the Thai military, because while the Thai military to some extent looks to China as a political model, and Prime Minister Prayut has talked about liking the China model of market Leninism. In fact, the Thai military still looks to the United States in terms of its doctrine and training. Another area I think it could be difficult for Thailand is some of the acquisitions that the Thai military would like to make. For example, the Thai Air Force is talking about acquiring the F-35 aircraft. Now, I think if Thailand continues to get too close to China, for example, by acquiring the Chinese submarines, although that's now very up in the air, we don't know if it's going to happen. I think the United States will be unlikely to share its highest technology. So I think that's the situation. There won't be the costs of Thailand playing a balancing game will often be acceptable costs, I think, for the Thai government. They won't be huge costs, and I think Thailand could do that. Of course, in the event of a military crisis in Taiwan, for example, I think it would become more difficult for all Southeast Asian states, and indeed for everybody, really. Of course, in the event of a US-China war over Taiwan, which would, of course, be a catastrophic war, then balancing strategies, I think, become more sustainable. But congratulations to Ajahn An. I think it's a really fascinating use of Samgok, and I look forward to reading more of your work.
Okay, thank you, Craig. There are any response from Ajahn An?
Thank you, Kun Natha, and thank you, Professor Raymond, for your very stimulating comments and feedback. First, Kun Natha poses a very important but also very difficult question, right, on the roles of Thailand amidst this new geopolitical tension, which Kun Natha correctly described as a long-term struggle between the two main superpowers and not going in a different direction soon. And I think that what I highlight in my presentation is actually that we have to escape the black and white ways of thinking, right? I often go to a class and students ask me whether we should side with China or the US. Students often ask me whether is it true that people say it's the end of America, the rise of China, or the end of globalization and the rise of decoupling, right? And what I'm trying to describe in the presentation is that the real situation is actually a lot more complex and a lot more fluid. Right? It's not either the end of globalization and either, but also not complete decoupling, right? So it's something in between, right? And I think that that's also true when we talk about Thailand's position. I often advocate against taking side And I think that normally the mainstream view in the Thai academia is also to advocate for balancing between the two superpowers. Of course, when you hear this answer, you say it's too general, right? It doesn't really indicate concrete action. So I also add that when we talk about balancing, there's also two ways of balancing. Either reactive balancing, meaning that when the U.S. approach us, we are reluctant to engage with the U.S. because we are afraid of what China will think, and the same goes as when China engages with us. We are reluctant to engage with China because we are afraid of what the U.S. will think, and if we take that attitude, then perhaps we do nothing, right? So I advocate for proactive ways of balancing, which means that first we need to know what's our interest. We need to know what our negotiating points, what's our bargaining power. And to tell you the truth, right, I think there's a lot of reflection that we need to do in order to reach the answers to this very difficult question. Now to Professor Raymond's three fabulous points. I totally benefit a lot from hearing Professor Raymond's remark. Especially, I agree completely on your view about the importance of also thinking about soft culture, right, and how that soft culture might relate to this geopolitical tension that we are talking about. I also agree with you that we need to broaden our discussion from geopolitics to geoeconomics. And I think this is also one main difference if we compare it to the previous Cold War with the Soviet Union, because at the time it's really realpolitik, it's really core political contest, it's actually a military contest. But now it's a lot more, the contest between China and the US is a lot more on the economic sphere, a lot more on the technological sphere. Right? So when we talk about the Thailand's position, it's not only the debates about our security position, but also our economic interests, and also, as Kun Natha mentioned, right, our technological interests. Whether in the future we have to use both iPhone and Huawei, if the technological sphere is actually really decoupled, right? So to conclude, perhaps I might not have many things to add in concrete terms of the ways that Thailand should position ourselves. But because I think that my major point to all of you, and also the main point that I want to communicate via my presentation, is that the answers are not that important, but we have to start with the right question, right? And the right question can only be from understanding or conceptualizing this complex and fluid geopolitical landscape, not as a black or white, either or type of thinking, but as this really complex, dynamic ways of thinking. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ajahn Craig, if you available, please follow my presentation. Frankly speaking, I not prepare presentation today. Response answer from Kun Natha. However, she raised very quick and big question to my presentation today. At the beginning, I would like to show my PowerPoint first. My point is China weapon sell to Thai military. My point is, at the beginning, I am political scientist. I used to visit quite often to China, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam before COVID-19, quite often. but I do nothing. I can use any Chinese. I went there, even though I don't know the area of the Yunnan. My professor, Dr. Chatit Natsupa, mentioned this is not China. It's not Chinese. The Chinese is Han above Yangtze River. I learned a lot from him. It seemed to be the Peking thing about Southeast Asia, differently from Yunnan, from Kunming, from Nanning, totally different. And also, I am civilian, but who try to understand military role in terms of the politics, international relations, because however we study on postmodernism, soft power, however we should understand a core key player in Southeast Asia politics. It is military role. So I try myself to learn, even though before 6 months ago, I don't know what defense diplomacy is. The big issue of me is about what China will sell to Thai military, and why they sell. It means that why the Thai leader bought it, and what implication, not just for Thailand, but for this region. It may be fill in a big gap of understanding of the Great China and US and Russia as well in this area. My research start to aim what comprises militaristic cooperation between Thailand and China, and what are the political implications of sales of arms by the Chinese to Thai military, and why does the Thai military is sale from Chinese, and what has lead the Thai elite to consider purchasing arms, and it means that how does the Sino-Thai military cooperation affect to the security of Thailand and Southeast Asia. At the beginning, when I tried to study about the military relation between China and Thailand, it's quite similar to all of Thai citizens. We know that China is the biggest trading partner to both Thailand and ASEAN. Also, China would later to be number one of investor for both ASEAN and Thailand. And, he was the biggest investor in real estate, condominium, big house in the Bangkok and around Bangkok in the Phuket, and many places, the city in Thailand as well. And when the Chinese tourists come, we are welcome, both for the elite of Thailand and Thai citizens as well. But we don't know much about the military cooperation between Thailand and China. Okay. I don't think by myself, or I never dream. I quote in code, but translate into English. General Pravitt, Deputy Prime Minister of Thailand and Minister of Defense whispered to one senior reporter on Thai military. He mentioned on the Thailand relation and U.S. You don't not write the Thai and Chinese more stronger relation. Please don't write in that because the U.S. push us too much to election, general election. So don't write it. Yeah. And then this is another phase. Former Prime Minister General Prayut Chan-o-cha, Thailand will procuring submarine not to be used, but in combat, but so that others would fear us. It's coding. I got luck very much because I am Thai. I cannot read Chinese, but because of researcher, I asked my colleague from Chinese Study Center, Chulalongkorn University, Institute of History, translate to me and find many news in Chinese newspaper and found that General Prayut Chan-o-cha of Thailand explained the reason using the submarine cheapest price and there are no problem with quality. We bought 2, got 3. And in my research paper, I quote the news from the Chinese news reporter mentioned, oh, Thailand is our friend. If they bought Chinese submarine, Thailand will be another good friend, similar to Pakistan, because only Thailand and Pakistan bought submarine version. Chinese buy to Thailand. Very important. Why the top leader who are used to be army in chief, Minister of Defense, think about bought the weapon by not rational much, by think about the cheapest of Thailand, by this is a friendship. This is a key version. The submarine for me, it means that friendship, it is representative of friendship of Thailand and China. Okay, Sino-Thai military cooperation. I come to what the relation is. This is the numbers year of the all weapons which the Thai military bought from China. It starts from when? 1987. Who are the main chief? General Chawalit, Yong Jai-yut. With the what price? Friendship price. Who knows? How many? Who knows? But it is a very turning point of the Thai and China relation on military. Thailand bought a lot. Army, Navy, Air Force, every year. Yeah. And on my observation, surprisingly, since General Chawalit bought the weapon from the China, 2006, the coup happened. Can you guess what did the weapon of the Thai military bought it. The tanks from Ukraine, oh my God. It seemed to be when you make the coup, you have to buy the weapon more. And then 2015, coup again, and bought the weapon again. You see, because if before the coup, there are civilian government, but you cannot stop any request from the military leader. So you bought. But we bought a lot of weapons from China, particularly on the submarine. In terms of the value, in terms of the price, the highest of the price compare the other item of the weapon purchasing. Come to here, this is about the joint Sino-Thai military exercise venue. It's quite a lot. It's about the Sino-Thai relation from the Army, Navy, Marine, Air Force. I learned a lot. In this morning, our friend mentioned, Dr. Bandit, there are a lot of India joint military exercise in the world. But why we don't think India is a threat? Why? Because it's too far? It's geographical? No. But for Thailand, why the Thailand military leader not think about the Chinese, about the distrust? Why? As I mentioned earlier from we talked about before, Dr. Ahn, I mentioned on the mentality, perception of the Thailand leader. Can you heard about anything bad story? No. From the Thai leader toward China? Can you heard about the Uyghur issue? No, we send back. Right? Can you heard about even though Tu Hao laundry in Thailand? But you can heard the Prime Minister said that? No, because we are friends. It seemed to be he born his group, three Paul, Pravit, Anupong, Prayut, as a good friend of the China military leader. This is the point why we mention a lot on Myanmar crisis, as Suparak mentioned, because the key player in Myanmar is belonging to China as well. This is my point. It seems to be when we talk about the how position of Thailand between two superpowers, it seems to be what is existent, what is the structure, what is the basic, and what is the mindset. Not me. I'm not influenced, but for the Thai leader. Okay. This is about I just conclude that on now there are the cooperation between the Norika Institute as well from the China. I briefly in my PowerPoint joint venture, joint military exercise. Thailand is the first ASEAN nation to engage the joint military exercise with China. Okay, then briefly. And come to the question of why. Post-Cold War as well. On my study for political scientists, we are living in low external threat environmental. But why we bought a lot of weapons a lot? First answer is about because of the procurement or the weapon purchasing took over by military officer. And secondly, I get some idea from Professor Greg Raymond. It's about the mentality of the Thai leader toward to the world since colonialism into now. Thailand will think about the unbalance between the power. Then Thailand leader cooperate closer with the superpower since colonial period. French beating for the British, US beating for the China, and China beating for in the Cambodia internal war, for example. So let me briefly on the end of my presentation. For me, when I study on the China relation in ASEAN, particularly from the previous research project, it's about the platform economy and BRI ASEAN orders. I learned a lot because it's not just about the military. However, it seems to be we have to reinterpret the China diplomacy. It's about we look at to the Belt and Road diplomacy. It means that China invests in the infrastructure, and also it's about the software power as well. And also it means that the railway, port, road connectivity is for capital trade and human flow. Okay. In the future, I look beyond. When we study on the smart city, as you mentioned, it's come. The new technology now is about the smart city. It's belonging to the superpower as well. US, German, Japan, and China as well. My friend from the Kyoto University study on this. So it means that if you invest for the smart city, it's the highest value for the capital in Thailand. And also you have to use the technology model, rely on that model as well. And then, very interesting to me, vaccine diplomacy. There are many reports from Singapore. It's mentioned, utilize vaccine diplomacy. It's come into Southeast Asia as well, including Thailand. So it means that defense diplomacy for me is about the military defense diplomacy. It's about the Belt and Road Initiative and new technology to invest in the Southeast Asia under the smart city model as well. This is my conclusion, because conclusion is mean that for China the feel some gap in Southeast Asia on Thailand as strategic location, fill in on military cooperation as well now. And also for the China need about the friendship, good friend in South Asia. I think this is one part of the defense diplomacy as I did on the research project on defense diplomacy. Thank you. Yes, please, อาจารย์ Dr. สิทธิผล
Okay, good afternoon. First of all, I have to thank Ajahn Ukrit for inviting me to join today's activities. My comment will be brief. I think the first thing when we talk about Sino-Thai defense diplomacy and Thailand's purchase of Chinese weapon, the first thing we have to think is what are the purpose of China's arms sales to foreign countries. I think this is the first crucial question. I think there are two purposes for China's arms sales to foreign country. The first purpose is to generate profit for the defense industry and the PLA, because we have to understand that no military general in China has been in the Communist Party Politburo standing committees since 1997. And after the inauguration of President Xi Jinping, he promoted the so-called Xi Jinping thought, which is incorporated into the party constitution in 2017. It says that the party should have absolute leadership over the PLA, over the People's Liberation Army. Therefore, it is a challenge for the Chinese leadership to make sure that the PLA is satisfied with their subordinating role and pay allegiance to the party. And how to make the PLA happy? A simple answer is to generate profits for them. I think this is the first purpose for China's arms sales to foreign country, that is to generate profits for defense industry and the PLA. And the next purpose is for China's arms sales is to support broader Chinese foreign policy objectives. In 2017, in the 19th Congress of the Communist Party, President Xi Jinping called for coordinating development and security, strengthening adversity awareness, and preparing for dangers in times of peace. It means, or the implication of his speech is that arms sales should be considered as part of China's plan for stronger national security. So I think this is two purpose for China's arms sale. And the next point we have to ask when we talk about arms sales from China is, what about their arms sales behavior? Which country are the destination for these arms sales? I got the information from Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, and it says that since the decade of 2000, although China has established itself as an arms export leader, the overall value of its arms trade is still small in comparison with the United States and Russia. The US export more than 6 times of the Chinese total, and Russia export 4 times of the Chinese total. And from the year 2010, most of China's arms export, around 82%, were shipped to Asian countries, not in other continents. Around 82% of Chinese arms exports were sent to Asian countries. And the top 3 Asian purchasers are Pakistan, around 49%, almost a half, followed by Bangladesh, around 19%. And the third one is Myanmar, around 11%. All these countries border with India, China's regional rival. What about Thailand? Thailand is number 4 with only 3.2%. So it means that it is almost 4 times smaller than China's arms export to Myanmar. So from this statistic or from this figure, I think we can argue that in the eyes of China, arms sales to Thailand possess some strategic military significance, but not as much as the case of its export to India's 3 immediate neighbors, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Myanmar. So in the case of Thailand, I think it is a kind of business transaction rather than strategic calculation. And the final point is about why do the Thai leadership purchase China's arms. I think this is the question that Ajahn Ukrit want to focus and want to give an answer, right? I agree with Ajahn Ukrit's argument that the current Thai leadership's worldview and experience play a role in the formation of their pro-China attitude. Because unlike a previous coup maker, the previous coup maker in Thailand, at least they received some short-term training from the United States during the Cold War. But in the case of the current leadership, General Prayut, General Prawit, General Anupong, they rose in their military career after the decade of 1970s, after Thailand became China's de facto ally against Vietnamese military operation in Cambodia. It means, and so the experience of joining hand with China against Vietnam, yes, play a crucial role in the formation of their mentality or their perception of China. And apart from that, the Thai leadership, this guy also witnessed the 1997 Asian financial crisis, which was perceived as a kind of the collapse or the failure of Western-led capitalist model of development, and paved the way for the acceptance of the kind of alternative models of development focusing on Oriental wisdom. And one of them is China developmental success story since the beginning of Deng Xiaoping's reform and opening up policy in 1978. However, what I want to emphasize, this is my own interpretation, is that despite their pro-China attitude, the Thai leadership do not want to turn their backs to the U.S. At least Thailand's two largest source of defense equipment are Israel and the United States, not China. And so, in my view, Thailand's arms purchase from China are the current leadership gesture to the U.S. with two key messages. The first message is they want to show to the United States that Thailand has China as an alternative source of defense equipment. And the second message is that they want to show to the United States that in order not to lose Thailand in the U.S. current rivalry with China, the United States should avoid criticism of Thailand domestic development and other sensitive issues. I think this is all of my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So the time for afternoon comment, please.
I'll take that mic. I'll use that. This works, okay. Okay, Kandil. Last comments before we end today's program. So on the closing remarks, I will also be again inculcating South Asia and Southeast Asia. So first it will be China and the United States competition or lead to militarizations in South Asia and Southeast Asia. What it is in the geostrategic surroundings. Second, I will deal on defense diplomacy, the trends for peace and trends against peace. Third, defense diplomacy for development, like the presentations today came out on armies like the Korean people, the KPA, involvement in development, and military's involvement in operations other than war, more involvement than their own. So what that is. And the fourth is the defense and diplomacy for or against democracies, which means that it also spells out a few points. One is the interests of great powers
for their political and economic influence. And the other point could be to assist the autocratic regimes. And the other is to constrain criticisms. So let me go to the why militarization. Okay. So this is the region with the highest boots on ground. As per the global firepower of the 11 military strengths ranking, 5 are in Asia: China, India, Japan, Pakistan, and South Korea. 5 from Europe: France, Germany, Italy, Russia, and the United Kingdom, and 1, the United States. All the powers are in the Indo-Pacific regions: China, India, Japan, Pakistan, and South Korea, with territorial possessions as well as disputes in the Himalayas and South Asia, South China Sea. And the other 6, France, Germany, Italy, Russia, UK, and the United States, stimulating and motivating presence. South Asia numbers to almost 5 million, approximately 4,092,000. From 3.8 million in 1995, military expenditure was 16.22 billion United States dollar in 1998 to 95.07 billion US dollars in 2021. In addition, with an average 2.6% of the GDP. So Pakistan and India as opponents and China and India as contestants, with time and again confronting soldiers serve in South Asia. And are regions with the capacity to practice modern and unconventional warfare. Given this number and capability, it is even more important that security and defense matters are understood from a rather higher vantage point. So the total global military expenditure increased by 0.7% in real terms in 2021 to reach United States $2,113 billion. The first largest spenders in 2021 were the United States, China, India, and United Kingdom, and Russia together, counting for United States $64.5% or 782 billion US dollars, more than the next 4 put together. So China is to boost this country's defense budget by 7.1% to a total of 1.45 trillion yuan or 233 billion US dollars in 2022. So India's military spending is US dollar 76.6 billion, ranked 3rd highest in the world. This was up by 0.9% from 2020 and by 33% from 2012. So in a push to strengthen the indigenous arms industry, 64% of the capital outlays in the military budget of 2021 were earmarked for acquisitions of domestically purchased arms. So with this depiction, let me project 5 geostrategic surroundings. 1 is the grand strategic goals, geostrategic plans, and diplomacy campaigns are being executed by power rivalry during the pandemic, and the Ukrainian crisis will lay the course of possible disorder for a new world order that will have influence for the future of Asia's new normal. Like Europe-centric after the World War II, the world geopolitics is shifting to the Indo-Pacific regions with mounting engagements. 2, militarizations of the Himalayas and the oceans with the military threat more viable than before. 3, China and the United States rivalry and competition is more observed than ever before, with flashpoints in China's periphery, and economy will continue to remain as a tool of national power. 4, China's political ambitions and the rise in making China more dependent and connected economically and militarily with its periphery nations. 5, the traditional security architecture is being questioned for a new normal. Now, the second part I'll discuss is there are two forms or two choices. One, diplomacy for peace, where most of us Asians are engaged for international peace as part of the United Nations. Second is to diplomacy to diffuse resentment or diplomacy against peace. So when the world powers are administering for a new world order, Asia is finding a space for a new normal. The traditional forms of defense diplomacy are being challenged with broadly three natures of environments of diplomacy that defense forces undertake. So defense forces contend for a national sovereignty and territorial integrity, support national interests, but diplomacy is equally important for the endorsement that needs to emerge with backing from the day-to-day administration for modernizations of the forces. The establishment requires efficient diplomacy for a force to perform with efficiency to protect and defend their nation states. So diplomacy amongst different arms and services and civil-military relationship is similarly imperative as to the defense diplomacy amongst the defenders of national interests. This is internal in configuration, but domestic diplomacy in character. Second, joint military exercises, bilateral, trilateral, quadrilateral, multilateral, or as part of the international organizations is apparent. So Bay of Bengal initiative or the BIMSTEC joint military exercises is one example. The ASEAN's involvement with different powers in joint military exercises is another example. And the other example is the Shanghai Cooperation Organizations, which also has a multi-forces where Pakistan, all the in Pakistan, India, Russia, China are all involved. Now, the second choice, the diplomacy for peace, requires defense forces for international peace commitments. But the difference is it follows conflict to prevent further regional and international uncertainty. United Nations training centers are upcoming with multinational joint military exercises. For example, the Nepalese army, defense diplomacy ties is to fight for integrity not only in their home countries but also abroad, largely in the countries such as India, the United Kingdom, and as part of the United Nations peacekeeping operations. Therefore, the trends in domestic security environment, trends of regionalism, and the trends of internationalism, three categories of defense diplomacy exists as a confidence-building measures. One, domestic with a budget and internal service engagement. Two, regionals with international organizations as a platform with expansions, bilateral, trilateral, quadrilateral, and multilateral. And the third, international diplomacy for peace, when nations are involved as part of their foreign policy to be part of the United Nations peacekeeping operations. So the geopolitical, geoeconomics consequences to build sober and reliable intelligence-based assessments and forecasts on other key trends of threats to help to make informed decisions, identify opportunities, and anticipate risks through revitalizing the recognition Asian geopolitical relationship is the need to move into the 21st century, the century where BIMSTEC and ASEAN with one, policy of strategic balancing. Two, provide a diplomatic space for security diplomacy like BIMSTEC and ASEAN Defense Ministers Conference, Defense Forces Chiefs Conference. And it is also important to observe the subject matter from the Asian perspective. What this is, I will coin two things. One is South Asia, Southeast Asia regional security architecture, which requires space in adjusting and altering the geopolitical circumstances with China and United States rivalry. I would like to highlight a technical aspect of defense diplomacy procedure, which can be referred as the DDP, a procedure which I believe can contribute by being an undercurrent that can alter the course of Asia's voice in how world order is managed. It is very different. It is important here that we consider approaching this procedure proactively in order to prevent conflict rather than in response to them. In DDP, meeting the aim of 3 objectives is a priority. Identify and understand the geopolitical interests and integrity of all the nations in Asia. 2, identify and understand the risks of mismanaging these interests, bilateral, trilateral, quadrilateral, and multilateral between nation states. 3, mitigate or manage those risks by using a combination of a foxhole perspective. So examples of Ukrainian crisis, as warfare is becoming Ukrainian example, one unconventional and technological warfare where diplomacy has now become about which side to arm with modern warfare systems, NATO or the international organization UN's effectiveness. 3, joint military exercise is becoming a matter of political leverage, but it undermines diplomacy in defense. 4, when great power interests and integrity prevails, will international organizations like ASEAN and BIMSTEC be independent to uphold diplomacy over great powers play? First conclusion, defense diplomacy is undermined over great power politics. It is only a mechanism to respond to ongoing crisis, example of Ukraine. Second conclusion, resources and the extra-regional powers in international waters. So question, is militarization in the Asia and the Indo-Pacific region to prevent or to prepare for war? Prevention here through South Asia, Southeast Asia regional security architecture, and the DDP prioritized must be mechanized. So in the interconnected and connected world, variety of well-administered and efficiently managed cooperations will be desirable. We must all decide whether to see ourselves as separate, isolated, or as part of a larger we that appreciates and accomplishes on our irretrievable interdependence. As other global calamities constricts in, this is an examination we have to evaluate and we cannot afford to fail. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So let me thank you, all of you, to participate, give us many input, and we hope we will organize this seminar as a series in the future. Thank you very much. I would like to close this session. Thank you.